Hi everyone. I wanted to share some really personal experience about what it takes to market your book, whether you are traditionally published by a major publisher like HarperCollins or Penguin, Random House, or one of those top New York houses, or you are with a smaller boutique press. The reason I want to talk about this is it was 8 years ago that I was preparing for the publication of my second book, A Letter from Paris, which became a bestseller. Now, this was not an accident. So A Letter from Paris was published by Scribe, which is an independent publisher in Melbourne, Australia, where I am now. They also have offices in London and in the US. So they re-released it in Canada, which was all very intentional on my part to choose a publisher that had international offices. So I was remembering the month before publication, and I know a couple of memoir authors right now who are preparing for publication. They've signed the deal and they're waiting. Now, it's going to be a bit of a shock, probably, because I worked really bloody hard. When I think back to that August period, which was a month before publication, I couldn't take on any paid contract work because I needed to be available for media and publicity events. So my publisher would line up potential radio interviews. None of that would be firmed up until the actual week of publication. The press release goes out months in advance, but in terms of radio and news and television, they don't firm up their interviews until a couple of weeks ahead. So I was in this real limbo anxiety period, and I also was in a pretty intense living situation. It was the first year that I was living with my partner. We were in a 1-bedroom flat. I just got back and he was working not full time. He was home a lot of the time. So I did not have a quiet space to write, a private place. I remember getting up really early in the dark to go into the living room and do my journaling with a candle, just so I had some solitude and meditative creative practice every day that was out of any kind of interaction zone. Because for anyone who is having a memoir coming out or a personal story published, you need to be so steel yourself for the extroversion and the conversations and the communication that you're going to need to project and do. And it's about very personal stuff, okay? So you need to give yourself those core daily practices that keep you strong and grounded in who you are. So I was doing that, and I remember I was still doing some freelance writing. I don't do that anymore, but I had got some copywriting work for a local government organisation, I think it was. So I was interviewing, and I didn't really have a place in the house, the flat, where I could go and write and shut the door and not be observed or interacting. So it was a tricky time. And financially, I was waiting for the rest of the advance to come through. A lot of authors probably don't realize that first-time authors, that your book advance is not paid all in one go. You generally receive a portion on signing the contract, a portion on delivering the manuscript, and then the final portion on publication. Okay, so that final chunk of my advance was due to come through in September. So August was limbo period. So I was also not too sure how that publicity was going to look. I needed to line up people for my launch event. I didn't know how many people were going to come. The publishers organised it at Readings Booksellers, which is a fantastic independent bookstore. But I was just doing all I could to post things to Instagram and keep that momentum coming, and cover of the book and teasers. I had the book trailer that I'd created with my nephew. This was all work that I'd done completely unasked for by anyone, but it all contributed to a lot of pre-sales for the book. I shared the launch date with friends and family. I'd been building up my email list. I'd hired a coach to help me redo my website so that I could actually have a blog and an email list that people opted into. I'd written and designed free guides and recorded my first videos. I'd never done a video before because I knew how important this stuff is, being visible, to selling a book. Because this is the thing I think a lot of writers, particularly memoir writers, do not understand. And this is why this stuff matters to your publishing deal and the success of your book in the short term and the long term. You need to be visible. You can't just write you need to actually speak. You need to be able to speak on camera. You need to be able to speak about very personal aspects of the book. This is why you need to be grounded and anchored in your values and why you are writing this book and why it's so important. So you don't write a memoir to vent about anyone, because a memoir is a long-term project, and it needs to align with your values and what you are looking to be remembered for and share with the world in a constructive and beautiful way. So it's important to think about all of these things even in the writing process, okay? I remember it was such an uncertain time, and I felt very, 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 very exposed. We heard from the BBC in London. My publishers told me, because they had the UK office, that the BBC was interested in interviewing me. Now, this is a radio show that has 8 million or maybe billion listeners, and it's the BBC. And I was so intimidated and overwhelmed, and there was nowhere in my little flat that was going to be a quiet, padded recording area for that interview, because we do a preliminary interview. In case many of you don't know, when you do a major radio interview, whether it's with the ABC, the BBC, or a podcast, or a really well-known, even YouTube platform, there's often a preliminary research interview that's done, and that's just to sound you out on how you talk and how comfortable you are speaking about the story. They wanted to see if I had any further material, so any recordings or audio of my father. They also interviewed Coralie and Clementine in France, who were crucial to the story, and that was very special too. They packaged it all up. It was the most beautiful thing. If it's still online, I'll try and find the link and drop it below. But I was navigating all of this, and I took the time off, paid work to do this. And then when the book was published, which was in September the 7th, it was published in Australia, I didn't take on any contract roles from September, October until November. I needed to leave those 2 months I went to Sydney, I went to Brisbane, I did book tours, I did interviews, I did signings, I went to a number of bookshops in Brisbane that I knew were independent bookshops. I organised an exhibition in Sydney. I did all of this on my own impetus, okay? And this is what you've got to do. A memoir writer right now, her book came out a month ago, and she's coming to Melbourne from Sydney, and I know she's funding this trip. And, so she can meet with writers and do another launch and go to readings. And I just admire her so much, because so many writers don't do this. And I didn't do it with my first book because I didn't know that was what was required. But this is what is required to sell your book if you want it to actually get into people's hands and for people to know about it. People need to see and hear about things quite a few times and in many different ways to remember it, not just the cover, but the story, the name, radio, podcasts, any interviews, any connections, Instagram posts, friends who are writers. This is why relationships are so important, and you need to start building this stuff up and thinking about it at the very beginning of the process. It's not all up to your publisher. When my book came out, it was an instant bestseller. It was incredible. But there was a lot of pressure on me. I still wasn't working. I had the rest of the advance, but it was all up to me. And I extended that, and I kept that going, and I was writing my courses at that same time as well. So I think I wrote a number of books in that period, which I then got designed and sold on my website. I don't sell them anymore. I also did my first iteration of my memoir course. I recorded it. I paid someone to edit it because I wanted something to be bringing in income while I was doing all this promotion for A Letter from Paris. Sadly, I didn't know anything about online marketing then, so I just whacked it up on my website and nobody bought it, even though I'd paid for this course on it. I'd paid for all the video edits. Doesn't matter. It's all learning, and it all got better the next year when I did actually launch it properly. But I just want to share this video because I think that a lot of writers, they're keen to be introverted, and honestly, I'm an introvert. I am an introvert. I'm only able to speak here on video because there's no one else in the building that I'm in. But you learn a lot about speaking about the story, and you learn a lot from interacting and engaging and marketing your book, because marketing is just psychology, really, and it is incredibly fulfilling and moving and connecting to see people. Some of the most beautiful moments from that launch of A Letter from Paris in 2018 that I remember are when I organised the exhibition at the Alliance Francaise in Sydney, which was something that I completely just came up with because I had these beautiful photos that I'd found in the library, black and white photos from the south of France, from my late father's archives. And they all told a story, and we even had some photos of Michelle and letters, and it was Australian-French connection. It was about Australians in France, so there was a connection to the Alliance Francaise, which is a large organisation for Australians, French-speaking Australians and Australians in France. And we had this exhibition, and I prepared a talk, and I remember learning all about public speaking and how to prepare and write a signature talk. I also used that same talk, the signature talk that I developed when I did 3 major events at the Paris to Provence Festival in Melbourne, which my publishers actually paid for and organised. So whether you have a large or a small publisher, they will have a marketing budget for you, but it's really hit and miss what they might choose to spend it on. So you've got to communicate with your marketing and PR at your publisher so you know what they expect from you and what they're going to be doing. So anyway, I organised this Alliance Francaise exhibition on my own. I wrote the signature talk, I organised it, I bought a really nice dress, and I went to Sydney, and some beautiful friends and family and writers that I'd never met in person came to support me. There was over 100 people. It sold out, and people were queuing to get their copies of A Letter from Paris signed. And it just brings me to tears to think of the things that people said to me when they got to their place where I was signing their book, things that they realised about their own family or that had moved and awoken in them. I also received a really, really special letter by post from a man that knew my father, and he had found out about the book in the readings catalogue and sent his beautiful handwritten letter to my publisher to forward to me. He might have even been in his 90s, and he even sent a follow-up letter with some material of my dad's, which was really, really special. So it's these human connections. I met people in Brisbane that I'd never met before. Someone phoned the radio after I did the ABC interview and said that my father was their French teacher, and they met Giselle, and all sorts of connections and weird and wonderful things unfolded from all of those events. It was full on. It was full on and personal because it's memoir. So this is what I want to share with you. It's hard work. It takes grit, and you need to know yourself, and you need to be really clear on why you are doing this and what you want from this. And it's not just luck, and it's not just all up to your publisher. But if you have a really clear and strong why, and you love the idea of creating a work that will outlast you, then that's, only you can write, because only you can write your memoir. Only you have experienced your story in the way that you have experienced it. Only you have your unique worldview. Then this is the most fulfilling category that you could aspire to be published in. But it takes grit, it takes work, it takes determination and perseverance, and it's not a 1-month project. So even if you get the draft written in 90 days, as I teach in The Art of Memoir, you will still then need to revise it. You will need to then start the submission process. You will then need to work with your editor or publisher. And when you sign that beautiful publishing contract, you'll need to start thinking about how you're going to be doing the promotion and how it's going to tie in with your long-term professional goals and platform and website, as I did. Because the internet is how we find out about everyone and everything these days. Even though bookshops still exist, physical bookshops, we find out about what's in those bookshops and the events and things from the internet. So you need to be visible online. And don't be fooled that it's easy for anyone. Even if you see people like me now speaking and recording YouTube videos easily, it was never easy. I just practiced and practiced until I got clearer and more confident, and it stopped being so shockingly hard. but it's just that repetition of practice and giving yourself grace to fail, and just acknowledging that it is hard. And don't tell yourself that it's easy for other people, because it's not. I don't know one author that enjoys the intense shining light of visibility, particularly when it's memoir. I did an event with a really fantastic fiction author, just to finish up on this story, Natasha Lester. She's a New York Times best-selling historical fiction author. And we were going to the Geelong Library for an event. I was to interview her for this signature author talk on the research that went into her book to promote The French Photographer. Now, I'd been to Geelong Library just a year earlier as part of my book tour to promote A Letter from Paris. And someone in the audience actually stood up and said, "I knew your dad," and shouted out some pretty personal stuff. And I just wanted to cry, but I couldn't because I was on stage. Someone else shouted out something or asked a question that was a massive spoiler, and people in the audience gasped because many people in the audience hadn't read the book at that point. And so it was very, very intense. And then when I was doing the book signings, there were people that had known my father and they wanted to ask me personal things and talk about personal things. And that was very hard because I'm trying to sign and remember their names and keep my emotions in check. And they were sharing really personal stuff with me, and I had to remember to get their phone numbers or email addresses. So anyway, I went back to Geelong Library for the event with Natasha Lester, and she's just the ultimate professional, and she's done many, many book promotions now. She's up to her 10th, I think, in the French historical fiction series, and she's just the ultimate professional. And I learnt so much observing the way she prepared for her talk. But I did say to her, "Oh gosh, when I was here, I just saw so many people that I knew." And she said, "What? No, you don't want to see people you know at your talk or your event?" And I thought, gosh, I thought I should be grateful that they showed up, but it was just really validating to have that response, because it can really throw you when people ask you personal things or refer to personal things when you are there as a professional talking about this product, which is your book. And so I think for memoir, it is particularly intense and difficult. And this was coming from a fiction author who she wasn't even talking about her own personal experiences. So it's important to remember that you are a professional and the book is a product. And so to try to separate yourself in that way, but it is really, really difficult for memoir. And the emotional and the intensity aspect of the marketing and publicity campaign, particularly when it's a bestseller and particularly when it's published overseas and you're getting emails and contact from all sorts of people, good and bad, it can be very, very, you need to do a lot of self-care and stay grounded. Another tip that I wished I'd employed was to get someone to vet my email for the month of publication, because many of the emails that were coming through were very personal. People were sharing really personal, intense stories with me, and it really did interfere with me preparing for major interviews and conversations, because sometimes they were just really, really personal, intense stories that people were sharing with me. People share all sorts of things with you when you publish a memoir, so be prepared for that. And it'll generally be around the topic of the themes of your memoir. So obviously I had a lot of people sending me family stories and things like that. And social media as well, put on an auto reply on your social media. I had a lot of people sending me social media friend requests and messages and things like that, and it just gets a bit too much. So you've got to have some good boundaries up and in place, because you are promoting and you are sharing a lot with the world, but you need to be able to keep stuff for you as well. And that is why my journaling practice, getting up in the dark, having that silent solitude, alone time, coming back to me before I went out into the world every day and felt very, very exposed, was absolutely crucial. Okay, so I hope this helps you to understand a little bit more about the marketing and publicity process for a memoir. And if you would like help with a literary memoir you want to get commercially published, I have lots of offers and packages and things like that I will link to below. All right, I will see you soon.